Welcome, everyone. We're so delighted that you've joined us today to our Volunteers as Essential Community Heroes, the role of volunteering in driving action on COVID-19 and the SDGs. This is one of the official side events for the HLPF that is officially starting today and hosted by the Volunteer Groups Alliance. My name is May Cobb, and I am the co-chair of the Volunteer Groups Alliance. And I work for United Way Worldwide, which is a global organization in about 40 countries. But I am based in the United States and headquartered just outside of Washington, D.C. A welcome to everyone that's on our event today, and we are just delighted that you could be here, and delighted at the schedule that we have and all of the participants that will be sharing with you. Our panelists today and speakers provided great wealth of information that I know you're going to appreciate. The Volunteer Groups Alliance is a group of just over 60 organizations that work as a coalition and are bringing organizations together, and our membership is in about 150 countries. And we focus on really highlighting the work that volunteers make each and every day in delivering the SDGs. And specifically trying to call out the impact, the difference that's happening in local communities, what's happening regionally, what's happening nationally, and certainly all around the world. We think there should be greater visibility and recognition of this, and so it's because of that that we've worked to pull together, and a terrific team of individuals representing a variety of Volunteer Groups Alliance membership organizations have organized this event today. So we're really, really pleased about that. I wanted to provide a few technical instructions before we formally get going. Number one, you should be seeing at the bottom of your screen the closed captioning that's happening, so I'm hopeful that that will be helpful. We are recording the session, and so we'll be sharing that as well after. If you have questions, and I hope you do, or something that you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to put that in the Q&A section. So it might be on the bottom of your screen. If you're on a tablet or something, it might be at the top of your screen. But please, at any time, put those questions in, and we'll be going through those throughout our time together. And later in our session, we'll be preparing those questions to be asked. So feel free at any time it comes up, go ahead and put it in. We ask that you not put it into the chat box. We will be posting some things there for you, and you should get a notice about that. But go ahead and put any comment or anything that you might have in the Q&A section. If you want to do any social media and are going to be tweeting at all, feel free to use the hashtag volunteer groups when you make reference to anything from the session. I think that's all on our technical pieces. We're just going to be flexible with everyone. We know sometimes the internet can be temperamental from all corners of the world, so we'll do our best, and we hope that everything cooperates for us today. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for our session today. I want to introduce Ash Patel to you, and she is the co-founder of Prava and Commutiny, which I love the name. It's a youth collective. Both focus on youth volunteering and leadership organizations in India. She's a very strong believer in the power of youth leadership and the need for every sector to invest in creating enabling spaces for youth volunteering and active citizenship. She's currently facilitating the incubation of a multi-stakeholder solidarity process called the Varta Leap Coalition. And Ashraf has been part of a number of policy-making platforms, has worked in collaboration with CSOs, governments, the UN, and Commonwealth agencies on policy and on program strategy. And she is on the board of a number of organizations, including Oxfam in India, and the International Forum for Volunteering and Development. She's an Ashoka Fellow and a steering committee member of the Commonwealth Alliance of Youth Worker Associations, as well as WADA no Na Todo Abhiyan, which officially was part of anchoring the CSO findings for the VNR process in India. Thank you so much, Ash, for agreeing to do this, and welcome, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, May. It's an honor to be with you here to moderate this exciting discussion. Thanks for your welcome. COVID-19 has presented huge challenges for delivery of these sustainable development goals across the world, from health impacts to economic impacts. And this will have long-term ramifications for us, as we all know. It's wonderful to have all of you here in this discussion about volunteering in this context. We are also at a crucial point for the achievement of SDGs, and we know that we are rapidly falling behind our SDG delivery targets. And we also know that volunteer action has the greatest potential to contribute to accelerate this progress. Every year, 1 billion people give their time and energy to volunteer. In response to COVID, we are now seeing a huge surge in voluntary action from individuals and communities, and millions of citizens coming together in solidarity and spirit of reciprocity to promote responsible health messaging, support vulnerable groups, combat fake news, support education, health, and socioeconomic challenges that have arisen in this pandemic. In India, as well as everywhere, COVID has put a spotlight on the SDGs and exposed the big gaps in our society around public services. And at the same time, shown how volunteers have risen and responded in phenomenal ways. To just give you an example how I have experienced it here, when we had a countrywide lockdown way back on March 25th, within 2 weeks, we had 8.4 million people who were actually provided food, rations, meals, because they were stranded in different dire circumstances as a result of the lockdown. And this provision of food and rations was 37% of this large-scale mobilization was done by NGOs. In some states, 90% of the food service, from cooking to servicing to delivery and collecting of rations, was done by NGOs. And as we know, all of these NGOs are supported by hundreds and thousands of volunteers. So it's really been a phenomenal effort. A little more context to just sharing, since I'm coming from India, I also want to share, we have this unique situation that beyond the COVID response, we also have one of the largest youth volunteering programs, state supported, in this country, where 7.5 million young volunteers are involved in voluntary service, supporting all kinds of different SDGs. This is laudable. However, here and everywhere else in the world, we know that volunteering needs a lot more support and scaling up. And particularly for young volunteers, what we need to do is not only focus on what they give in terms of their contributions, but also what they get. And the time to focus on participation in decision-making of volunteers, building their agency and leadership, is now. The other thing we need to do is promote good practice in organizations that work with volunteers, and the recently launched Global Standard for Volunteering for Development is an essential resource in achieving this. The VNR process that we are all part of provides a crucial opportunity to take stock and reflect on the progress and to recognize the unique and powerful contribution that volunteers make to SDG implementation. When properly harnessed and supported and recognized by governments, volunteers and CSOs can play an incredibly powerful role in alleviating some of the worst impacts of poverty, marginalization, especially in these times. This support and recognition can take shape of national volunteering policies, laws, resources for volunteer management, infrastructure, recognition of volunteering in national SDG implementation plans, and each year governments have an opportunity to recognize the role that volunteers play in SDGs through their VNRs. At this event, we will be hearing from a range of distinguished speakers about how they have supported volunteers to engage both in the delivery of SDGs and the COVID response, and the role they feel that all actors must play to support and strengthen these efforts. We are going to hear from a distinguished panel of speakers from governments, institutions, and volunteer involving organizations to get the full range of views. So let me share with you, without much ado, all the people who are here and who will be presenting before us with all of you here. Thank you. We will begin. Yes, I'm very much here, and that's me. And we will begin first to hear from member states and the government perspective. And we will hear from the minister, Mr. Elias Tenorio, Technical Secretary of Youth from Ecuador. Very welcome, Mr. Elias. We will then hear from Ms. Winnie Musyaji from the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, Kenya. Next, we hear Ms. Emma Morley from United Nations Volunteers. We will then have an exciting panel of volunteers who will share their personal reflections on how they have contributed both to the VNR processes and COVID response in their countries. And for this, we have Fred Sadia from VIDÉO Network in Kenya, Rose Camera from YouthNet in Malawi, and Javier Alvarado from Fundación Telefonation, Ecuador. I hope my pronunciation is sort of okay. Thank you all for being here. Very, very welcome. And there will be a chance for our panelists to answer your questions. They would love to. So please, as May has already told us, kindly those who have come late, we would invite your questions on chat. Throughout the discussion, I will have help from my colleagues who will monitor your questions and bring them together. There is also closed captioning going out throughout the session, so please engage with that. If you want some help on that, please connect again on the chat. That's all for me from now, and we will now begin to welcome the first speaker of the day. It is an honor to welcome you and introduce the first speaker. Welcome, Mr. Tenorio from Ecuador. Mr. Elias Tenorio is the Technical Secretary of Youth for Ecuador. Prior to holding this position, he worked with several ministries on environmental, social, volunteering, and political issues. He has a long background of being involved in youth and volunteer activism. And most remarkable, at the age of 10, he was part of the National Movement for Children and Adolescents and the Children's Forum, representing and defending rights of the children and adolescents in various national and international spaces. He'll be talking to us about the contribution that volunteers have made to the COVID-19 response in Ecuador and the added value that he has seen volunteers making to the delivery of 2030 agenda. Please note, Mr. Tenorio will be speaking in Spanish, so we will be translating his remarks. Ms. Radia would be doing that, and it will be translated into English parallelly. I would welcome you, Mr. Minister. Could you kindly take the floor? Look forward to your remarks. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Ashraf, y a todos los participantes. Saludos desde el Ecuador.
Thank you very much, Ashraf, and to all participants, greetings from Ecuador.
En primer lugar, agradecer por la invitación, sobre todo por la gestión hecha por France Volontaires en el Ecuador, para que pueda participar y contar en algo lo que estamos haciendo en el Ecuador con el voluntariado.
I want to thank everyone for the invitation to participate, particularly to the Office of France Volontaires in Ecuador. I am excited to share with you some of our actions in volunteering in the country.
Asimismo, quiero ofrecer las disculpas del caso, además de no manejar un buen inglés. Deseé hablar en español por el carácter multilingüístico de Naciones Unidas.
I want to apologize for any trouble the translation might cause, but I also believe that the multilingual character of the United Nations is a good example of why I should be speaking in Spanish.
De paso, quiero agradecer a Raida por su asistencia en la traducción.
Y un placer.
Muchas gracias. Ok, en el Ecuador han existido muchísimas iniciativas de la sociedad civil y del voluntariado para acompañar la gestión de la emergencia relacionada al COVID-19 en nuestro país.
In Ecuador, there have been multiple initiatives from the civil society and volunteering to respond to the COVID-19 crisis.
El Ecuador está atravesando por un momento muy difícil en su economía nacional, como también en el manejo de esta emergencia que ya llevamos más de 100 días en este escenario.
Ecuador is having a very complicated economic crisis, and that is due to the more than 100 days that we have living this crisis.
Hemos visto la acción de varios grupos y actores del voluntariado que han sumado sus esfuerzos para en algo paliar las necesidades que están existiendo en nuestro país.
We've seen many actions and collaborations from volunteer organizations and groups to respond to the crisis and that is happening in the country.
Y no solo es la emergencia sanitaria, sino que estamos viviendo una emergencia económica, dado que el Ecuador está atravesando por una profunda crisis. Sin embargo, nuestro gobierno ha venido tratando de mejorar las condiciones para que los ecuatorianos no sientan con mucha fuerza lo difícil que es manejar una emergencia sin recursos económicos.
For Ecuador, the emergency, it's not only a health emergency, it's predominantly an economical one. And this means a profound crisis. At the same time, the government has been working with several actions to try to better the conditions for people to not feel the impacts as deep.
La mayoría de personas que están dentro de las organizaciones de voluntariado que vienen promoviendo acciones frente al COVID-19, en su gran mayoría son jóvenes que participan activamente de estas actividades.
The vast majority of people that are working as volunteers in the country to respond to the crisis are youth volunteers.
Estos jóvenes se han articulado en varios frentes de acción, como por ejemplo la Fundación Telefónica, la Fundación de la señorita Carla Morales y también la Fundación Cecilia Rivadeneira, entre otros ejemplos.
They have gathered through the efforts of different foundations and initiatives, including Fundación Telefónica, the group of Miss Carla Morales, and also Foundation Cecilia Rivadeneira.
Estas organizaciones han trabajado activamente para lograr contar con insumos médicos y de bioprotección, como también alimentos para las personas que necesiten atención en comida en este tiempo que vivimos esta crisis.
These organizations are doing tremendous effort to respond quickly with particularly two things. The first one is equipments, medical equipments to respond, and also providing food security for those who need it the most at this time.
Asimismo, el gobierno hizo un llamado para que ciudadanos no solo hagan donaciones de víveres, de comida como tal, sino también que acompañen las tareas de distribución de esa comida a través de la iniciativa Dar una mano sin dar la mano.
So the government has made a call for people to not only donate, but also help in the distribution. And all of that has been managed through a national strategy called Give a Hand Without Giving a Hand.
Es clave decir de que el gobierno delinea la estrategia de atención en emergencia, pero el rol de la sociedad civil y de los voluntarios es determinante en el manejo de esta situación.
It is very important to note that the government is providing structure to all of these responses, but it's actually the organizations of civil society organizations and volunteer groups who are doing the specific work in communities to respond correctly.
Hay muchas iniciativas de estas características, de bancos, de organizaciones de la sociedad civil, de jóvenes, de medios de comunicación, quienes están aportando activamente en paliar de cierta manera el impacto del COVID-19 en el Ecuador.
So there's a lot of initiatives that Ecuador is seeing from many different groups, including civil society, youth groups, the media, food banks, and they have all worked together to provide a concrete answer to the most important needs right now.
Pero también ha existido una importante presencia de médicos y de profesionales de la salud que, sin ser parte de un hospital formalmente, incluso médicos retirados, han decidido acompañar las tareas de emergencia con respecto al COVID-19.
But there has also been other forms of volunteering happening due to the crisis. A lot of doctors and medical professionals, many of them who are not part or who are not currently working with a hospital, or some of them who are retired, have also been volunteering to respond to the needs right now.
En este momento, Quito, su capital, está viviendo el embate del COVID-19 y el pico más alto de fallecimientos. Y Guayaquil pasó uno de los momentos más terribles en el manejo de la emergencia, no solo para el Ecuador, sino para Latinoamérica.
Right now, the center of the epidemic in the country is Quito, the capital, with and they're seeing their peak of deaths. But at the same time, Guayaquil, the second largest city in the country, is seeing a decrease of the number of cases. And they went from being the city in the region in Latin America with most cases to being one that has the situation more controlled.
En Guayaquil, la diferencia evidentemente fueron los voluntarios.
And all of these that happened in Guayaquil, the difference was made clearly by volunteers.
Porque recién empezaba la emergencia, recién empezaba la pandemia, fue un evento extraordinario de contagio y las organizaciones de voluntariado como las que mencioné, más otros actores ciudadanos se volcaron a Guayaquil para tratar de cierta manera de bajar los niveles de mortalidad que estábamos viviendo en esa ciudad.
So when everything started in Guayaquil, organizations nationally understood that they needed to do something about it. And they, in an organized way, were able to provide aid, going to the city and helping them pass this critical time.
Con respecto al rol de los voluntarios para fortalecer los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, creo que hay muchas cosas por decir.
When it comes to the role of volunteers to help achieve the SDGs, there's a lot of things to say.
En primer lugar, es muy importante la participación de la sociedad civil para que los gobiernos, particularmente el del Ecuador, tengan presente las necesidades ciudadanas en el cumplimiento de los ODS.
Firstly, it's very important to understand that civil society participation becomes a critical tool for governments to understand what are the needs of citizens when it comes to implementing the SDGs.
En todas las líneas que venimos trabajando, creo que hay roles importantes que ha venido desarrollando la sociedad civil, como por ejemplo en actividades relacionadas al medio ambiente y también a la participación ciudadana.
In each one of the lines that the government has been working in terms of the SDGs, the role of volunteers has been crucial, particularly in issues like civic participation and environment initiatives.
En ese sentido, es muy importante destacar roles como, por ejemplo, el de France Volontaires en el Ecuador, que ha permitido articular varias organizaciones con Fundación Telefónica y otros actores en una mesa que permita fortalecer el rol de los voluntarios en el Ecuador.
In this sense, it's very important to mention that collaborative work has played an essential role in elevating the work of volunteers in the country, particularly organizations like France Volontaires and Fundación Telefónica. Together with many others, they have put together a round table to allow a discussion on how to best work to have volunteering be a more robust action in the country.
Para cerrar, debo decir que es muy importante ahondar los esfuerzos para que justamente los voluntarios tengan mayor presencia y mayor reconocimiento en el país.
To finalize, I would like to say that we need to go deeper in the efforts to recognize the work of volunteers in the country.
Por eso es muy importante trabajar en conjunto para contar con una normativa legal que permita a los voluntarios tener mayor presencia y mayor contribución en la vida nacional.
That is why I think it's very important to work together to build a legal framework that would allow volunteers to have more impact in the nation.
Entiendo que estoy con el tiempo corto, así que muchas gracias y saludos desde el Ecuador.
I want to respect times, so I want to thank you for this time and send my regards from Ecuador.
Gracias, Raida. Thank you very much, Raida.
Sure, yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Minister, for a very comprehensive sharing. And thank you, Raida. We got a whole range of volunteer initiatives, but also how collaboration and the legal framework is necessary. So many thanks. We can move ahead and let us move now across the continents. And I would like us to welcome Ms. Winnie Masiaji. If you can please show up on the screen. Winnie Masiaji is a Deputy Director in the Department of Social Development within the State Department for Social Protection in Kenya. She's currently heading the Community Capacity Support and Development Division, where the volunteerism program is domiciled. She's leading the process of institutionalization, promotion, streamlining, and coordination of volunteerism sector to enhance the visibility of volunteerism in Kenya. And she has been spearheading the development of the draft National Volunteerism Bill and the National Volunteerism Action Plan for implementation of the volunteerism policy, which would facilitate realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. Ms. Musyaji has over 30 years of experience in social protection policy, and in 2018 was awarded Head of State Commendation by His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, for her contributions in social protection and programming. Ms. Musyaji will be reflecting on her perspectives of the contribution of volunteers from her ministry in Kenya. Over to you, Ms. Winnie. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I first of all want to say thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this meeting. I think it's very important. And for us, we really feel honored to be able to participate. I will share my screen. Okay. Are you able to see it?
Yes.
You're able to see it. Okay, thank you very much.
You may want to put on the slideshow if you want.
Yes, let me put it on. Yes, let me put it on.
Okay, yes, please.
Okay, that's okay. Okay.
Yes.
So I want to say for us, volunteer is a very, very critical part of Kenya's activities. And we feel very, very, very much honored to be able to be here, to be able to say what we do as a country with a volunteer. Let me just minimize that. Okay, in Kenya, I want to say that volunteers, in Kenya, I think we are one of the countries that are really honored for being able to involve volunteers in most of the activities. And I want to say in the realization of the goals, I think volunteers in Kenya have really played a very important role because they contribute to even our Vision 2030, the SDGs. We are looking at the UN, the UNDAF, the UN Development Assistance Framework. We make sure that volunteers are part of all this. And overall, we have a policy that was developed in 2016, and it provides guidelines on how we can effectively engage volunteers and in a coordinated way. The Kenya volunteer policy has facilitated a lot of coordination, and I think we bring in a lot of partnership. We work together, and this is really helping us in terms of even realizing the SDG 17, because we really work together to be able to make sure that we achieve the goals that we want. Apart from that, in realization of this as a country, we have developed an action plan that is helping us in terms of implementation of the volunteer activities, in terms of coordination, and even being able to work together to realize our goals together. Our ministry, where I fall, is charged with the mandate of being able to coordinate volunteer activities. And one of the things that we did, first of all, was to do a survey and see what role or how much contribution do the volunteers make. And this survey showed that Kenya volunteer work contribute to a total of about 669,000 hours to the economy, translating to about 3.7 for the GDP. So that we are saying that, therefore, that the volunteers play a very big role in this, in terms of the whole achievement of all those things. We have volunteers of different ages, and all of them have a role to play. And they are both in the rural and urban areas in terms of their contribution. And we have both female and male volunteers who are actually playing a very critical role in terms of development process. Volunteers in Kenya have been involved in several development activities, but this of course depend on the priorities of the different communities, because they work in different communities, and they look at what is a priority. They are involved in areas including emergency, peace building, cohesion, issues of health, and even welfare activities. So they have been very, very, very critical in terms of the development. A survey that was undertaken in 2019 showed that 37,000 over 37,000 volunteers dedicated their life and skills just within that particular year, their time and skill in terms of the achievement of the SDGs. 15 volunteer involving organizations reported to having involved volunteers that actually contributed directly to the intervention of SDG 7 with the direct bearing to some of the other SDGs like 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 13, and 15 and 16. So we are seeing that every SDG has a touch of volunteer contribution in them. The volunteer population actually, what they have done maybe in terms of the SDGs, we are looking at some of the practical things that they have done. And we are seeing that most of the contribution has been in SDG 3, where it looks issues of promotion of health. And I think we all know that most of the time when these things happen, like when it's health and things happen, that well-being of the people, we find the volunteers are normally the first people always to arrive in places where they are needed. Other SDGs that follow that they have contributed mainly is SDG 15 and 8. This is economic growth, where it really involves a lot of volunteers in that. And we have just a graphic indication of some of the ways of the SDGs where they have contributed very actively. Some of the examples that the volunteer communities that they have done is, we have an organization called Jukumu Letu Community. It's an organization within the community level. It has helped to enable 1,000 out of school youth to access education. And this is basically looking at the SDG 4. And this is one of the, most of the volunteers in our country work in the informal settlements. Like in Nairobi, we have several informal settlements, and that is where they're actually needed most. And that is why you find them contributing in terms of education and other things. And we know that even in terms of peace building, volunteers play a very big role when it comes to peace. They are some of the volunteers have come within the communities, and they go to the communities and they're able to talk and help in terms of creating peace and reducing the conflicts in the hotspot areas. So our volunteers have been very, very critical, especially in the formal settlement. In terms of other organizations that deal with volunteers, we have the VSO that works, is a very large organization that the Kenya chapter here has really worked in terms of empowering the youth and engaging them. 548 volunteers were reached, who reached about 30,000 youth in terms of employability, skills development, promoting decent work and all that. So they work with the communities, engaging them and working with them within the various communities depending on what is required in those particular communities. We also have the Presidential Award, which is one of the volunteer organizations that work with the youth here. And they worked with about 14,000 graduate volunteers to carry out medical camps across the country. So they work, and it benefited about 294,000 people within the various areas in Kisumu. And as I said, most of them work within the informal settlements in Nairobi. In terms of the COVID, the issue of the COVID really affected people. And again, I'll say that apart from the rural areas, the places that are affected most are the informal settlements in Nairobi. Nairobi has very, very large informal settlements. And when it comes to issues of health, because of the crowd, the issue of social distancing, all of that, economic mitigation, those areas were affected very much. And apart from the volunteers, I know Kenya, a lot of other organizations have also come in to support. But I think I want to just appreciate the fact that the volunteers really played a very key role in terms of responding to mitigate against the COVID-19. Kenya reported its first case in March. And up to about a few days ago, we had passed over 7,500 positive cases, with about 150 deaths.
Winnie, Miss Winnie,
yes,
may I, sorry, just because of time, if you could kindly.
Okay, I'll try and go very quickly. Yeah, so I'll just give a few of the examples that have happened, and in terms of movement and being able to intervene, the government has come in terms of coordinating these volunteer groups. And some of the activities that have been taken, including the WASH group, the food ration distribution, some entrepreneurship, some agricultural activities have been taken in Nairobi because and the rural areas to be able to support these people because of the issue of social, economic difficulties that they are going through. A lot have been achieved in terms of that. They have been able to reach several families, about 2,000, in terms of promoting use of face mask, hand washing and all that, and food ratios, some of them individual things, sanitary equipment in terms of being able to reach the girl child, because they have been very much affected, the girl child in that. Several families, yes. I'll try and go as quick as possible. I know the time is not, actually, but in terms of collaboration also.
Maybe we can also share the PowerPoint with the participants. So if you can bring it to closure, please. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, I'll just quickly, but I think I've not even used my 7 minutes, but let me just try and say that some of the general challenges are effective. We don't have enough data to be able to know what we need to how many volunteers are working. Sometimes we need to have to help us in terms of planning and budgeting. And then also the issue of the silent features. Some of the people have not been able to involve their volunteers for fear of being infected. In conclusion, I want to say that that during this COVID-19, at least to be able to protect the volunteers, the government actually has set up an intersectoral agency that is helping in terms of coordination of the volunteer response. And then Kenya, we are also having a bill that is trying to promote and protect the volunteers from as they do their daily work. We also have a policy in place, and this policy is helping us in terms of enhancing planning, budgeting, because there's no visibility in terms of budgeting and even reporting on volunteer activities. So we are trying to have this policy to help us in terms of managing and coordinating and even promoting the issues of volunteers with adequate budgeting and even adequate reporting on the volunteer activities that are taking place. I think that's what I have, but I think I didn't have adequate time to be able to go through. But I want to say that volunteers have done a lot in terms of even managing COVID and even contributing to the SDGs in general. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Fasiaji. Sorry for interrupting, but I think it was a very comprehensive sharing and just amazing amount of information and metrics, which is so critical. So thank you so much for sharing. We'll come back for questions, and I think it'll be a great idea to share the presentation with the members. Thank you all. We will move to our next speaker. May I invite Ms. Emma Morley, Chief of Volunteer Advisory Services, UNV. Emma? Yeah. So it'll be lovely if we can now, yeah, sorry, Emma is on the screen. Can we, yeah. Yeah, hi, welcome Emma. Ms. Emma leads UNV's work to position, strengthen and integrate volunteerism in the 2030 agenda through research, policy and programming. She has 19 years of strategic policy development and programming experience with the United Nations and the UK Department for International Development, DFID, in Africa, Asia and Latin America. Prior to joining UNV, she led UNDP's work in support of the governance transition in Myanmar for 2013 to 2017. Welcome again, Emma. Kindly take us forward. And we are also going to be hearing and seeing you in the Global Technical Meeting on Volunteering. So welcome. Please go ahead.
So thank you, Ash, and thank you to the Volunteer Groups Alliance for enabling UNV to have a voice today. So I've been asked to answer 2 questions. The first question is around what evidence do we have about the contributions that volunteers are making to the delivery of the 2030 agenda. And linked to that question is my expectations for the Global Technical Meeting, which I think we're all very excited about next week. So let me start by looking at the question of evidence. So the issue around evidence started back in 2015 when the original General Assembly resolution on the Plan of Action for integrating volunteering into peace and development requested volunteer stakeholders to look at the evidence, knowledge, and lessons learned on how volunteering had been originally integrated into peace and development, and when the General Assembly resolution was updated in 2018, into the Sustainable Development Goals. So our role next week in the Global Technical Meeting is to really see what evidence we have to date on the integration of volunteering into the SDGs, and also to use that evidence to think about what next. How do we actually need to reimagine volunteering for the decade of action? So I think when we talk about evidence, we talk about evidence in terms of two functions. Firstly, evidence around volunteering itself. How do we gain a better understanding of the types, trends, and changes in volunteering? And secondly, evidence around the connections between volunteering and the Sustainable Development Goals. How does volunteering, what's its impact, the economic and social contributions of volunteering to the 2030 Agenda? I'm going to go over quickly some of the key messages, but I also want to flag that next Tuesday, session 2 of the Global Technical Meeting will specifically focus on evidence, where we'll go over some of the messages I'm going to talk about today in greater detail, and also have a global conversation on the importance and role of different kinds of evidence. So over the last 3 to 5 years, we have an increasing amount of evidence and different types of evidence. If we actually backtrack even further to the International Year of Volunteering in 2001, we can see that our understanding of volunteering, the research and evidence has really increased exponentially. We see, for example, some of the work of the Volunteer Groups Alliance and member states in increased reporting by member states of volunteering in VNRs, and between 2016 and 2019, 46% of all VNRs have acknowledged the positive contributions of volunteers to the SDG. We see expanding statistical measurement with an estimated 95 member states measuring volunteering through official volunteering tools and surveys as defined by the International Labour Organization between 2007 and 2019. And UNV is also putting together a new knowledge portal, which will be launched next Monday after the opening session of the GTM. And we've had over 200 reports and papers submitted to the evidence library of the knowledge portal. And we see in this really a diverse range of research and data, varying from academic evidence and methodological surveys to civil society reports and things like that. So what does the evidence tell us about volunteering? Firstly, it shows us that how and why people are volunteering is changing and is increasingly complex. We see a number of variables which influences and shows us the way people volunteer in terms of structure, for example, formally or informally, site, online or offline, intensity, regular or sporadic, motivations. Is the motivation to volunteer about building yourself as an individual, or is it for a cause? And we see various categories of volunteering, such as mutual aid, service, leisure, campaigning. We also see the evidence increasingly shows that volunteering is not equal. Most volunteering is done informally or directly without the formal organization. And very often the people who volunteer informally don't have the same rights and protections as perhaps people who volunteer formally. We see that there's been a big push through the Agenda 2030 on the principle of leave no one behind. We see strong evidence that that is resulting in greater opportunities to access volunteering for youth, but not for other groups, okay? Mm-hmm. Especially for older people, women, disabled people, so there's a mixed story there. We also see that volunteering roles and tasks are not evenly distributed, and there is an issue coming out in the research around the role of informal volunteering and women, and the blurred lines between informal volunteering and care roles. And this exposes women to risks that perhaps other volunteers don't face. In terms of the evidence around volunteering for the SDGs, I think the most important thing, and something which really we need to feed into our discussions, is that there's a high level of appreciation of the relevance of volunteering to the SDGs. We conducted a global survey on volunteering with over 21,000 replies, and we have this astounding figure of 99% of people who appreciate the relevance of volunteering to the SDGs. We see that volunteers are making the most contributions in the provision of essential services, especially to health and education, but we also see broader evidence highlighting the contributions that volunteers make beyond service delivery. And here we're talking about things like that we've heard in the discussions today around solidarity, knowledge exchange, innovation in crisis. But we also see, against the original analysis that we did of the Plan of Action original objectives dating back to 2015, there were 3 objectives around how we actually integrate volunteering into peace and development. And these were around ownership, integration, and measurement. In terms of ownership, the evidence shows that there's been an increase in terms of consultation, participation of volunteers in peace and development and SDG processes, but these haven't necessarily transferred into ownership. So there's an issue of power dynamics and agency there. The second issue is around integration. We hear a lot around volunteering schemes, laws, policies on volunteering itself, but the evidence on how that has been integrated into local, sectoral, and national planning efforts is very limited. Only 18% of voluntary national reviews talk about volunteer contributions in the context of national SDGs policies and plans.
Yeah. Emma, we have a few seconds if you could take it to us.
Let me just crack on then. In terms of measurement, we see a lot of efforts to diversify measurement, but there's a disconnect with policy making. So let me just finish by concluding on what I'm hoping to achieve from the global technical meeting. So I think I've highlighted some of the main strands of the evidence here. What we're hoping for the global technical meeting is to take this forward into a conversation with multiple voices to really advance the discussions and debates on volunteering, which will result in a global call of action. And I think there's a couple of key questions around integration of volunteering into policies and planning, the diversity of volunteering practices, how we nurture the transformational role of volunteering, how we nurture a policy environment which realizes that the volunteering and development landscape is shifting, and looking at inequalities and vulnerabilities, and most importantly, what are our next generation volunteer models? So I know we're pressed for time, so I'm going to stop there, but I really like to thank you, and yeah, I look forward to the conversation after the other speakers.
Thank you so much, Emma. We look forward also further and also further down the week as we see all these developments in the meeting, GTS meeting. So thank you. Okay, so thanks all to the panelists so far. Let's move to the next segment, and we will have a panel discussion with our volunteers, our very special guests here, volunteer speakers from VNR countries. We have Rose from Malawi, Fred from Kenya, and Javier from Alvarado, Javier Alvarado from Ecuador. So if we can just come on the screen. I'm sure lots of you will have lots of questions, but if you can just keep putting them on the chat, we are collecting them for our panelists so far, but before that, we'll have a panel discussion. So Fred, Sadia, welcome. Mr. Fred has been at the, could you show up on the screen, please, Fred? Mr. Fred has been at the forefront of volunteer efforts in Kenya, working closely with the government to develop their national volunteerism policy and volunteering bill. Fred is currently the secretary and the national coordinator of the Volunteer Involving Organizations VIO Society Kenya and Kenya representative Good Deeds Day International. Rose Kemera from Malawi is responsible for coordinating. Rose, can you please come up on the screen? Coordinating 130 youth volunteer groups who lead in development advocacy work in local communities. Rose, it'd be lovely if you could show up and we can see you. She's a member of Malawi's VNR Sub-Task Force on Volunteerism and Youth and participated in a report on youth perspectives which fed into this year's VNR process. Finally, we have Javier, is Chief Operations Officer of Fundación Telefónica, a VIO and civil society organization in Ecuador. Welcome, Rose. And Javier has over 17 years experience in working with NGOs in the field of social and human development. Yeah, so welcome all of you. We will just go into a panel discussion. We have a little time constraint, so I'm going to just move a little bit faster. So Fred, maybe we can begin with you, and let's begin by hearing how is your network engaging in COVID response in Kenya? And if you could make it like maybe 2-3 minutes so that we'll cover everyone and then we'll come back to discussions. Yeah. Yes, Fred. Could you put on your mic, please? Fred, your microphone needs to be on.
It is on now, I think. You can hear me now?
Yes, continue. We can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think, let me just see that my phone is also well put. A little bit technical here. But now you can hear me, right?
Yes, very clearly. Please continue. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Right here, I think addressing the COVID situation in Kenya, I would say that it was a shock, as I believe, across the world. However, I want to very fast appreciate that the volunteers in Kenya responded positively. And of course, with the elaborate effort by the government, that jointly together, we've been able to respond very, very, very much well to the need that has been there in the communities. As my colleague from the ministry where we are based alluded to earlier, the government had put in place containment measures. And so a majority of volunteers then were required to be able to implement that. And I think the first thing and the most important was safety of volunteers as well as communities within which we were going to be of help. And one thing as could probably have been experienced across the world is that this challenge came at a time that none of us expected. And so most often volunteers are supposed to be within communities where they are supposed to work. You realize that even some of our member organizations which had placed volunteers within communities had to recall some of the volunteers. The volunteers that we were working with, for example, international volunteers, some had to be recalled as well and had to travel back to their home countries. But we still had the Kenyan volunteers who committed themselves. And I would highlight, for example, that when it came to the aspect of sharing relevant and correct information as shared by government, we now had to measure by engaging community volunteers. And we as the VIO Society know that we have member organizations that are well established. For example, the VSO in Kenya, the Kenya Red Cross. These are big organizations here which are responding so fast, the UNV program in Kenya. But we also have community-based organizations. And we found that the best avenue for us now to work was to engage with 5 member organizations that have their volunteers well embedded within communities. So we identified these groups, and with support from our partner, the Good Deeds Day International, we were able to roll out different interventions, for example, wash campaigns, where we had our volunteers reaching out with information about washing hands, sanitizing, what we need to do, wearing masks. But also there were those immediate needs that needed to be met when the whole country was at some point put on lockdown. We thankfully have started gradual reopening as of yesterday. But we realized that we needed to complement the work we were doing by giving even the food portions that were needed to communities. So we went out of our way, and from my desk, we coordinated the work of more than 200 volunteers that are based in different communities within our city of Nairobi, and also reached out to some that are based within the rural areas of Kenya. As my colleague Winnie had said earlier, we have an expansive informal settlements in Nairobi. And so we were looking at even the populations within these communities and how we as volunteers were going to ensure that we were going to reach out to them, at the same time making sure that we obeyed the government directives on how not to be possible victims or maybe to victimize others by passing on infections. So we reached out by that, but as we were all down in the communities taking all these precautions, we also realized that there was a surge of a lot of mental distress. And so we started programs that were now addressing directly how we could mitigate the mental stress that people were in, because everyone was down. The levels of earning are different. The greater majority of the people we're working with, those who are, I would say, with all respect, possibly living below $1 a day. And so you realize that one member organization from the Kenya Red Cross had set up a call center where people could call in, a toll-free line. People could call in and share their distress, and this could also be used as a way of identifying those that needed critical assistance that maybe probably needed a direct contact with a volunteer. So amongst ourselves, we would liaise and work closely to know which of these needed that urgent support. We also realized that the majority in Kenya, as in most of the African continent, are the young people. And we wanted to bring them on board. But even while we wanted to bring them on board, they also had the same challenges. So youth were going through quite a lot. And by engaging them in trying to find most innovative and safe ways to support their communities where they are, I would say that I'm glad that the team of volunteers we worked with, the 5 organizations that we engaged, did a sterling job, and for which now we can even be proud of, even though the numbers still keep on soaring, and we are absolutely hopeful that things will be better.
Thank you so much, Fred. That was amazing. And just congratulations from all of us for all this fantastic effort with your organization. So thanks. Let's hear some more and we will come back with questions. Rose, may I welcome you? And I understand your network was involved in producing a report from youth volunteers that you shared with your government. If you can please, as part of the VNR process, could you kindly tell us what was the main message that you wanted to share? Welcome, Rose. Maybe, Rose, are you with us? Okay, maybe we'll come back to you, Rose. Okay, maybe we'll just come back to Rose. Javier, maybe we could come to you till Rose comes back. So Javier, let's hear from you. How are volunteers contributing to building resilience in your country?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say that volunteering in Ecuador is a common effort. It's a joint effort among different organizations. I think that what we have learned from the emergency, from this pandemic, is how are we going to join our efforts towards a common cause, towards a common goal. And that's what we see in here. And in terms of the work that we are doing together in Ecuador, I would like to mention first that as part of the national network of volunteer, together with France Volontaires, with the Red Cross, with Volontaires and the Scouts, BASE, the Fundación Telefónica itself, and UN volunteers, among others, we have been working together in terms of putting into the discussion and into the reflection how volunteering is going to make an impact, a real impact on the society. So we've been moving the discussions not only in terms of the public policy and how do we need to move into a law, legislation, so we can have a better action from volunteer efforts in the country from different organizations, but also bringing into the society the reflection of what does it mean to be a volunteer? How are we going to make a real impact in the society? How are we going to put in place our competences for the well-being of those in need? Also, we've been working together in terms of the research of this of the UNV request of information, so we can find out where is Ecuador in terms of volunteer. And we found out that there were no data in terms of what volunteers are doing. So this is an important key aspect in terms of both for the government and for the social civil society, in terms of knowing where to move with a joint plan of action in the field of volunteering. In terms of the work that we are doing as Fundación Telefónica, the vision that we have is that we don't want to leave anyone behind the digital transformation. And in terms of that, we recognize that the pandemic has been a key moment to put in place all our efforts towards the connection of people in terms of the work that we are doing. So we put all our programs in digital, and we have a site, for instance, which is called Nos Vemos en Digital, with translated See You in Digital. And then where people can actually get access to free courses to gain competences in the digital side. For instance, teachers which are involved in the educational system, people who wants to only have a moment of entertainment, and how are they going to experience digital expositions of art? How the family can join together and share and write and read some stories for children in terms of what is going on with the pandemic. But also we've been working together in terms of the SDGs. How are we going to put in place the competences of the volunteers to work together, for instance, for the SDG 4, and how we're going to put the competences of the volunteers in the corporate side for the well-being of teachers and the educational system. How are we going to engage other companies together with us to move and to the respond of the needs of the educational system, but also in terms of employment. We're working together in terms of gender equality. How are we going to reinforce the participation of youth women and women in general as professionals in the fields of science, technologies, and so on. So we've been moving together with the agencies in terms of working in the initiatives such as Women for Women, and leading themselves, mentoring other girls in terms of how they can empower themselves and how they can see these positive role models of the work. But finally, one of the things that we see is how are we going to connect, for instance, the donations that people have been providing for the response on the epidemic with crowdfunding initiatives where there are a volunteer need of supporting others, but also with those who are at the community level. And how are we going to transfer not only these products, but also transferring the competence? Sure. How are we going to build resilience in people?
Okay, sure. Javier, we'll wait for more questions. I think we've got a good sense of, if you don't mind, if you can close, then we will move for questions. Would you like to add or just take it to closure?
Yeah. And one of the things that we would like to say is that volunteering work is not only a matter of providing things for the communities, but it's being empathic with a cause. And being empathic with a cause is also a matter of transferring the competences. For instance, now in Ecuador, there is a need for entrepreneurship. So how people are going to be in the service of those new entrepreneurships with their competences.
Sure. Okay, thanks. Very important message in terms of closing. Thank you, Javier. We will open up for questions and take some more. Thank you so much for bringing really good experience and insights. I'm going to have to check again with Rose if you are able to come on. Then we can have your sharing. Maybe Rose has, I'm sensing that there is a technical issue and Rose is not being able to come on. I'm really sorry. As soon as we get her, we will bring her on. Maybe this is the time, maybe could open up for questions and lots of questions have come from our guests. So I think we'll just go into questions. I'm sorry, folks, we'll just have to move ahead and we'll catch Rose as we can. So thanks, Javier, and thanks all the panelists for the sharing. Let's move to some questions. What are we getting? My colleagues have been sharing some questions. The first question we have is, why has financing volunteering been a challenge, even though there is more than enough evidence of its economic contributions to development? This question is from Meshach, VIO Society, Kenya. Can I invite you, Emma, to respond to this from your experience?
Thank you, Ash. So let me just answer. I think there's two parts of the question. One is around the economic contributions of volunteering. And I think here there's still, in terms of the evidence base, there's still a lot of work to be done. Notably, Australia a couple of years back, I can't remember the exact figure off my head, mentioned in their VNR, they calculated the economic contribution of volunteering to their overall development process. And we're working on different versions of measurement which look at really how we actually measure the economic and social contributions. In terms of the financing, I think this is one of the greatest challenges here, because a lot of the finances goes through what we would call formal volunteering and organization-based volunteering. But as I said in my presentation, 70% of the world's volunteers are informal. So the challenge is here is, how do you finance protection mechanisms, for example, insurance schemes, health schemes, mental support schemes for volunteers who are working in situations like COVID or in crisis situations, without actually formalizing them to an extent which takes away some of the distinctive forms of volunteering. So I think the Red Cross and Red Crescent societies have some interesting models on that, mainly looking at insurance and how we actually do that.
Thank you so much, Emma. And my guess is at the GTS, you would be taking up some of these issues as well, right? Okay. Thanks, Emma. Thanks a lot for throwing light on that matter. A lot to be discussed on there. Let's try to look at another question. Ms. Vinny Musiaji, could you take this question? And this is really about mentioning the, you had very comprehensive data. A lot of the people in the guests have said you had, and even I found very good data. And there's a question on what is the source of your data that you have in Kenya on volunteering, and what was the survey used, and how do you measure your reach? So just a little bit on this data, that wonderful data that you presented. Ms. Vinny, would you care to come show up on the screen and answer this question?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And before I answer that, probably I also want to mention why sometimes there's no funding for volunteer. Most of the countries, we have not been having good policies that help us in terms of driving forward the budgeting process. And now Kenya, I'm very proud to say that now we have developed a policy, and we are also doing a bill that will help us in terms of getting funding for this. In terms of the source of the data, one of the surveys was done with our ministry, coordinated by our ministry, and it was on measuring the impact of volunteers' contribution. So that is what I was saying, that it was found that the volunteers contribute to 3.7% of the GDP.
Yeah.
So we actually were part of the survey. One of the other survey that was done that was not showing the contribution, but at least showing what is, of course, showing, not giving figures in terms of the how many, but it was done by the VIDÉO Society, where they're looking at generally which are the SDGs that the volunteers contribute to. And we tried to measure the volunteer contribution looking at the man hours, the hours that they give in terms of volunteering. I know it is very difficult still to know which are the measures that can be used to effectively measure volunteerism. So again, as has been said, we are also trying to look at how can we measure volunteerism in terms of their contribution. But currently we're using the man hours. How many hours do they give to the various activities that they undertake? And for Kenya, as I said, it was about 669,000 man hours that they have been contributing, looking at the time frame for that.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Raji. Can we, the next question that's coming up from the participants today is kindly highlight, this is for Fred, maybe you could take this, kindly highlight the benefits of volunteering intended in the National Volunteering Bill that you shared about. Fred, could you take this question, please? The benefits of volunteering intended in the National Volunteering Bill that you, yeah, Fred.
Thank you very much again. One of the benefits of the volunteering bill is the government acknowledging that we exist. And I think recognition would be very important that volunteers are contributing significantly to the development of a nation. And so that is, as again, Madam Winnie has mentioned, that this law would now allow the government to do budgetary allocation to support volunteering across the country. Even just to mention that currently we have a two-tier system of governance. So we have the national government and we have the county government. And we believe that once the government has appreciated of this and the bill is gone through, then resources would be cascaded down from the national government to the county governments. And we believe that then that would mean development at the most grassroots level, where we really want volunteers to appreciate the bottom-up approach. The other thing that we see the bill giving us strength to do is to now find a more pragmatic way to be able to do the measurement of contribution of volunteering. And apart from that, the basic of why we want a volunteerism bill to go through is that we want volunteering to be part of something that is inculcated in the family system. And so we as Kenyans want to embrace this idea. It is something that has always been there, but now we want to take it to another level, that it is something that would be taken by government, but most importantly by the citizen. So it is going to give us an array of advantages that maybe due to time might not be mentioned here. But it's a good thing that we're working on it, and we hope that we will conclude on the bill soon as we are able to deal with the COVID situation as a country and of course globally.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks so much, Fred. May I put in a question? Okay, we do have a question some more questions from the audience, and maybe we can invite Mr. Minister, Mr. Elias, would you care to share with us how can we and how are you all measuring the contribution of informal volunteering in this time of COVID, or how can we measure it? How can we measure this informal volunteering, if at all? Yes.
Elías, hay una pregunta para ti y es ¿cuáles son algunos de los mecanismos que están utilizando o que se pueden utilizar en Ecuador para medir el impacto de los esfuerzos informales de voluntariado en el país?
Bueno, inicialmente en el Ecuador se vino trabajando desde hace algún tiempo en una mesa de voluntariado que a la final, entiendo yo, era una articulación de la sociedad civil que tuvo algunos inconvenientes por ser fortalecida. En este caso, Francia Voluntarios con otros actores vienen trabajando. La Secretaría de Juventudes ha sido actor también de esta iniciativa de constituir un nuevo espacio que sea como una mesa de voluntariado que permita articular estos esfuerzos. Sin embargo, debo reconocer que no tenemos un mecanismo específico de la medición del impacto de los voluntarios en el Ecuador, dada la falta de algún documento e insumo, dada la falta de normativa legal para aquello.
He believes that it's very important to work collaborative to build these frameworks. And this is what the Roundtable for Volunteering in the country is trying to achieve, working together to open spaces to have these discussions. But he needs to recognize that currently they don't have an organized or a structured framework to measure the impact of volunteers. And he believes that one of the reasons that that is happening is because there is no legal framework that recognizes the work of volunteers in the country. So that needs to be the first step in order to create measurement schemes.
En algún momento contaremos con un mecanismo de medición de impacto. Eso se lo ha planteado, el presidente lo ha planteado, y esperemos tener un mecanismo que cuantifique el impacto de lo que representa el trabajo de los voluntarios en el Ecuador.
Yeah, so at this moment is very anecdotal, the collection of data that they have, but the president of the country has a stress on the importance of building this measurement framework, and they are working on it.
Okay, thank you so much. That's very helpful. I'm afraid we are not able to get Rose back in, and I have very shortage of time, so maybe we will need to sort of go for closure. We don't have the last question for you, Javier. A lot of possibilities on discussion of also digital divide, but I'm afraid I'm not able to place that question. We are running short. So I will just go into very big thanks to all the panelists. I think we've had a very comprehensive discussion from the countries and also from the volunteers. We are learning not only the value of collaboration. We began with this whole idea of collaboration, what is most important, bringing volunteers together, then to focus on also what sort of volunteering mechanism, what structures and legal frameworks are required, that we cannot work without them, and also the different kinds of volunteering engagements that all the volunteer agencies have supported. Without the engagement of CSO, civil society organizations, and partnerships of governments, this process could not have come together to this level of success and the emergency response that we needed to do. We also got a hint of the need for digital engagement and looking at mental well-being as one of the core components of volunteering activity, and how to look after the safety and security and the needs of our volunteers. I'm going to invite May to kindly come in and please take forward the closing of this process. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ash, and thank you to all of our presenters and speakers, and to each of you for joining in today. There were so many questions, and I know we always wish there was more time for this, but we will be following up and sharing the presentation that you saw from Winnie in particular. I know there were questions about sources and can we get in touch with folks and things like that, and so we will follow up with all of that as well. I do want to say a particular thank you to my colleagues from the Volunteer Groups Alliance, to Raida, and to James and Heather and Clarice, who are doing a lot of the work behind the scenes, and David as well for his technical support. And to remind everyone that next week is the Global Technical Meeting that Emma mentioned. It's happening between July 13th through the 16th. And we would encourage, if you haven't registered to attend that, to please join for more comments and conversation. And a huge thank you to the organizations that are part of the VGA, who in addition to being so active and engaged, have also financially supported the work to allow us to do the many things that we're doing. So you'll see on the screen where you can register for the GTM at volunteersdgs.org. And then again, a thank you to Ash, all of our speakers, and for all of you for joining with us today. We appreciate it, and I hope you'll enjoy the remainder of the HLPF, and we'll be in touch, I'm sure, soon. Thank you.